We are taught that war, inequality, and patriarchy are natural, that men have always been in charge, that competition and violence are just how human beings are wired. But what if that story is wrong? What if the historical evidence points to something almost the complete opposite? And the reason we were never taught it is that the people who controlled the universities did not want to believe it. For a long time, linguists noticed something strange about the languages of Europe, Iran, and India. They all seemed to share the same deep roots: English, German, Greek, Latin, Persian, Hindi. Words like father and mother sound startlingly similar across all of them. The English word tu, the Hindi vava, the Latin duo. 1,000 similarities across dozens of languages. This suggested that all of these languages descended from one original tongue, now lost. Linguists called it Proto-Indo-European. Here is what they were able to reconstruct about the people who spoke it. Their vocabulary was full of words for wheels, not just one word, 5 different words. This means these people invented the wheel somewhere around 3500 BC in what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. Their language also had rich vocabulary for dairy products: cow, milk, buttermilk, cheese. They were not primarily farmers. They raised livestock, and they were, remarkably, the first people in human history to become lactose tolerant. Their bodies actually evolved to digest cow's milk. As a result, they were on average 20 centimeters taller than the farmers of Europe. And they had words for horse. Not just for the animal, but for riding and controlling it. They were the first people to domesticate horses, a process that took roughly 3,000 years because horses are naturally programmed to flee from humans. These people figured out how to ride them. They were called the Yamnaya, and eventually they spread their language across the entire world from Europe to Iran to India. The question is how? For most of the 20th century, the dominant theory was cultural diffusion, the idea that languages spread not through conquest, but through trade and influence. People voluntarily adopted the more useful or prestigious language. The way English is spreading today, not through armies, but through movies and internet. Then came the DNA evidence. Over the past 15 years, advances in genetic science allowed researchers to extract DNA from ancient skeletons and compare populations across time. What they found was unambiguous. Starting around 3000 BC, the genetic signatures of the original farming populations in Europe were largely replaced. Huge percentages of the population simply disappeared from the genetic record. That does not happen through cultural influence. That happens through conquest and genocide. Which brings us to the woman who saw all this coming decades before the science caught up with her. Marija Gimbutas was a Lithuanian archaeologist who worked at Harvard and UCLA. She spent her career excavating the sites of old Europe, the farming civilizations that existed across Europe from roughly 6500 BC until about 2500 BC, the period before the Yamnaya arrived. What she found was extraordinary, and what happened to her findings tells you almost as much about how knowledge works as the findings themselves. Old Europe was peaceful. We know this because the settlements had no fortifications, no walls, no defensive structures. The people had the metallurgical knowledge to make weapons, but they chose not to. Instead, they built temples. They created pottery. They covered everything in intricate art. Their burials were communal, everyone buried together with no meaningful distinction in wealth or status. The Yamnaya burials, in contrast, were individual, and buried with each person were weapons, horses, and cattle, the possessions of a warrior, the markers of private property. Gimbutas argued that old Europe was not just different in its material culture, it was different at the level of fundamental values. The religion of old Europe was centered on a mother goddess. Not one god among many, but a force that encompassed everything: animals, plants, water, stone, the turning of seasons. All of life was sacred. The snake, which modern Western culture has associated with danger and evil since the book of Genesis, was in old Europe a symbol of life, energy, and regeneration because snakes shed their skin and are reborn. Even the symbolism of color was inverted. In old European culture, black was not the color of death. Black was the color of rich soil, of fertility, of the womb. White was the color of bones and death. The entire symbolic world was organized differently. And women held genuine political authority, not symbolic authority, real decision-making power in their communities. Why was Gimbutas laughed at? She was working in universities dominated by male scholars. She was arguing that for thousands of years before the Yamnaya conquest, European civilization had been largely peaceful, egalitarian, and led by women. This was, to put it mildly, inconvenient for people who believed that male dominance and human violence were natural and inevitable. But here is what changed everything. The DNA evidence came in and confirmed her core claims. The old European populations were largely replaced, which means the Yamnaya did not just influence the culture of Europe, they conquered it. The patriarchy, private property, warfare as a way of life, these are not eternal features of human existence. They were imposed on Europe by a specific group of people at a specific moment in history, roughly 5,000 years ago. Before that, for 4,000 years, Europe had operated on entirely different principles. Women were not less powerful because of biology, they became less powerful because they were conquered. This matters for the same reason all historical revisionism matters, not because the past can be undone, but because when we mistake a historical accident for a natural law, we imprison ourselves in it. If you believe that men have always been in charge because men are naturally superior leaders, you accept that as permanent. But if you understand that the current arrangement was constructed at a specific point in history in response to specific forces, it becomes possible to imagine something different. Marija Gimbutas spent her life trying to show us who we were before. The science eventually proved she was right. What we do with that knowledge is up to